Hey guys, and welcome back. When it comes to Zelda projects, here on the channel, I've done the Blast Mask, the Deku Mask, as well as the Moon from Majora's Mask. But for today's project, I'll be making the Deku Baba. Now, keep in mind, the style of Deku Baba are different in each and every Zelda game. However, for this sculpture, I'll be combining two separate designs. Firstly, I'll be applying the colors of Ocarina of Time, and also Ocarina's design, where the Deku Baba doesn't have any teeth. On the other hand, Twilight Princess has the Deku Baba looking like it's coming straight out of your worst nightmare, so I'll be incorporating that giant tongue into my version as well. And with that in mind, let's get started. First off, I began by bending a wire coat hanger into the shape of the neck and covered it with an even layer of Sculpey. I pre-baked that part so I'd have the strongest base to build onto, but in hindsight, I should have been working with Super Sculpey or at the very least, a stronger polymer clay. Once that was all taken care of, I made a bunch of little spikes and attached them to make it look like a rose bush. I didn't realize how heavy the head was going to be, so I did end up having to fix quite a few stress fractures that appeared in the neck midway through the sculpt. Thankfully, this project still turns out just fine, but that's something to be aware of when choosing the right material. I also took a ballpoint stylus and carved in some striations and different textures onto the entire surface. Next, using some lighter aluminum wire, I created the shape of the mouth. Once the proportions were looking just right, I added some crumpled up aluminum foil to fill out the rest of the head. From there, I covered the remaining surface with a very thin layer of Sculpey so it's not too heavy, and got to work sculpting in the details of the mouth. After that, I rolled up some clay to create the lips and blended each of them into place. Now, I also went back to etch in some wrinkles and skin texture. I also made sure to add a separate texture for the lips. Since the entire head is mostly going to be one color once I start painting, I'm really going to rely on these different textures to separate the different elements of the face. Following that, I sculpted a few flower petals and attached those at the very end of the stem. Now here's where things get tricky. Like I was saying, in Ocarina of Time, the Deku Baba actually doesn't have any teeth. While that may have been a creative decision, honestly I think that was probably just because of N64's limited graphics at the time, so I want to keep my sculpture consistent with that, but also make it feel realistic. So, after a bit of brainstorming, I decided to make a bunch of little holes in the lining of the gums, and that way it looks like over time, all his teeth might have just fallen out. Next, I have to make the monster-sized tongue that'll be hanging out of its mouth. As per usual, I added in some grooves, as well as a crease down the middle of the tongue. I also rolled up some little balls of Sculpey, and those will work perfectly once I squish them on to make some taste buds. Once that was looking good, I attached the tongue into the mouth and made sure to insert some aluminum wire to help anchor everything together. For the terrain, on the other hand, I rolled up some chunks of Sculpey and built them up around the stem. This isn't the final look for the terrain, so I'm not worried about sculpting any of the details just yet. At this point, I'm really happy with the sculpting process, so I turned on the oven one more time and baked the entire thing for 35 minutes. Now, I still have a couple of these stone coasters lying around from another project. They're made out of slate, so it has a really cool rocky surface, and more importantly, they're pretty heavy. So I decided to attach it onto the Deku Baba as a counterweight. After the glue was dry, I started working on the terrain. I took some wire cutters and began chipping away at the Sculpey on the base. Now this works perfectly because these larger clumps, they actually break apart just like the texture of an actual rock. Using some drywall plaster, I filled in any gaps that were still showing. I made sure to keep all the small little pieces of Sculpey that broke off and glued those around the base of the stem so it looks like the Deku Baba is bursting up through the dirt. Finally, I'm happy with how the terrain itself turned out, which means it's time to start painting. I began with a few layers of brown for the base, then moved on to a bright green for the stem, all with acrylic paint. To make sure this Deku Baba actually reads as a Deku Baba and not a piranha plant from Super Mario, I mixed up the perfect shade of blue and covered the entire head. After that, I added in some neon blue for the highlights. And to give it all a bit more definition, I applied some dark purple to increase the shadows. However, the stem still needs a bit of work to make it feel a bit more realistic, so I painted on some dark green to tone it down. Next, I applied a watered down brown wash to bring back all those small little details. Following that, I did the same with the base, starting with a brown wash, then adding in selective areas with a few more colors. To make the ground really stand out, I started dry brushing some highlights along the edges. I also realized that the mouth and the gums still needed a bit more definition, so I toned down that blue with some darker purple. Now, a while back, I saw some really cool concept art for a Deku Baba that had an orange tongue, and I'm definitely going to try to incorporate that. I think it's going to stand out in contrast to the blue and definitely draws in your eye towards the mouth. With that in mind, I made sure the crease in the tongue had enough contrast, then added some bright tones onto the taste buds. I also painted on that lime color to certain parts of the tongue to help blend everything together. After that, I kept on dry brushing a few more highlights to bring out all the details that went into the sculpting process. Finally, a lot of plants in real life have sort of a waxy, reflective texture, so as always, I coated the surface with some clear craft glue. It especially gives the mouth an extra glossy appearance, which really helps make it look as if it's covered in saliva. And just like that, this Legend of Zelda Deku Baba is complete. All that's left to do is sit back and enjoy the final result.